Wyoming Territory, August 1874. The wind howled low across the plains as the wagon wheel cracked in two, jerking the back axle and toppling the canvas-covered cart into the dust. Laurel Granger hit the earth hard, her shoulders scraping against the dry rock, but she barely felt the pain. Her eyes searched wildly for her children. "Ruthie, Ruthie, where's your brother?" "I do not know, Mama," Ruthie cried, her small arms pushing herself out from under the broken timber. Laurel scrambled across the dirt. "Ronan!" A boy's cry rose from the brush, and she ran to it, barefoot, bleeding, her dress torn. She found Ronan cradling his wrist, pale and shaking, but alive. She pulled him to her chest, her arms wrapping around both her children as the dust settled around them. The wagon was splintered beyond use. The oxen had bolted. Her husband, Jacob, had been buried 3 days ago behind a stand of cottonwoods after fever took him in the night. Laurel had not even cried then. There had been no time. But now, with the sun dropping and no water, no food and no way forward, it all came crashing in. She knelt in the dirt, her children clinging to her, and let the tears fall. The next morning she tried walking. Ronan's ankle was swelling, and Ruthie was too tired to keep up. After barely 3 miles, Laurel knew they were not going to make it. Her legs buckled. She sat down on the side of the trail, pulled her children close, and whispered, "I am so sorry." A distant rhythm broke through the silence, hoofbeats. She blinked through the heat haze. A lone rider. He had a wide-brimmed hat, a rifle strapped to his saddle, and a long, dust-covered coat. His horse was dark and lean. He slowed when he saw them. "You all right, ma'am?" His voice was low, calm. His eyes, under the brim of his hat, were sharp and steady. Laurel stood, shielding her children. "We lost our wagon. My son is hurt." He dismounted fast, kneeling by Ronan. "Let me look." He was careful, gentle. "I am Hayden Zeller," he said over his shoulder. "I am headed west. I got supplies. Water." Laurel's throat burned. "Please," she managed. Hayden handed her a canteen, then gave the children small sips. He checked Ronan's foot, wrapped it with a strip of clean cloth from his saddlebag. Then he stood and looked at Laurel. "Where were you going?" "Oregon," she said. "We were following the trail. My husband died 3 days ago." "The axle snapped yesterday," he nodded, quiet. "You cannot outrun the trail when it breaks you." She stared at him. "What?" He looked at her, then really looked. "I lost someone too, a long time ago, same trail." Laurel's breath hitched. Hayden looked away first. "I will take you to the next town. Fort Bridger's 6 days out. I will get you there." She hesitated. "Why would you help us?" He met her eyes again. "Because someone should." The next day they rode together. Ronan sat in front of Hayden, Ruthie behind Laurel. Hayden had a pack horse with extra supplies and shared everything he had: jerky, dried apples, coffee. He said little, but when he did speak, it was with care. At night they camped under the stars. Laurel watched Hayden boil water, make a small fire, wrap Ronan's bandage again. "You do not talk much," she said quietly. Hayden glanced up. Not much to say. She watched him for a while. "You said you lost someone. Was it your wife?" He looked down. "My brother. We were crossing to Utah. He was 12. Snake bite. I am sorry." Hayden nodded once, then stood to check the horses. Laurel curled around her children that night, but sleep did not come easy. Her mind held too many memories: Jacob's slow decline, the way he whispered her name before he slipped away. She had not cried then. But now, with the stars overhead and the firelight flickering, she let a few tears fall, quietly. So her children would not hear. In the morning, Hayden handed her a warm tin of coffee. "You did not sleep." She took it, surprised. "How did you know?" "You watch people different when you have lost someone. I know the signs." She met his eyes. "So do I." The trail was hard, but Hayden made it easier. He carried Ronan when he had to. He made Ruthie laugh once by pretending a lizard was a tiny horse. And when Laurel's hands bled from walking so far, he offered her his gloves. "You do not have to be kind," she said, taking them. "I am not kind," he replied. "I just know what it feels like to be left behind." One night, after the children were asleep, she sat beside the fire, watching Hayden carve a piece of wood into what looked like a horse. "You are good with them," she said. "I had a nephew once. Raised him for a time. What happened?" "His mother came back for him. She was ready." Laurel watched the fire. "I do not feel ready for anything anymore." Hayden stirred the coals. "You are still standing. That counts." She looked at him, and for the first time since Jacob died, she felt something shift. She did not know what it was yet, but it was warm. On the fourth day, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked across the sky, and Hayden pushed them into a shallow ravine for shelter. Laurel held her children close as rain slammed the earth. Hayden covered them with a tarp. His arms braced around them, keeping out the worst of the wind. Her face was pressed against his chest, her heart loud in her ears. "You are freezing," she whispered. "So are you," he said, pulling her closer. They stayed like that until the storm passed. Afterward, he helped the children sleep again, then came to sit beside her. She was shivering. "Here," he said, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "You will be cold." "I will be all right." She looked up at him, eyes searching. "You do not even know me," he met her gaze. "I know you are trying to get your children to safety. That tells me everything I need to know." Her throat tightened. "You are a good man, Hayden." He shook his head. "Not always." She reached out, touched his hand. He did not pull away. By the fifth evening, they crested a hill, and Hayden pointed. "Fort Bridger. See the smoke." Laurel felt her knees go weak. "We made it. We will be there by morning." That night, after the children fell asleep in their shared bedroll, Laurel sat beside Hayden again. "I do not know how to thank you," she said. "You do not need to." "I want to." He looked at her, eyes soft. "You already have." She stared at him, her heart pounding. Do you have somewhere to go after Fort Bridger?" "No," he said slowly. "I was just riding." She swallowed. "Then maybe you could stay with us, just until I find work, or longer. If you want." Hayden was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers were rough, but the touch was gentle. "I would like that," he said. "I would like that very much." The first morning in Fort Bridger rose quiet and gray, the sky thick with low clouds and the air sharp with the scent of wet pine. Laurel stepped out of the cabin lent to them by the trading post's clerk, just a single room with a tin stove and 2 cots, but it had a roof, and it didn't sway with the wind. The children still slept, curled together under a quilt someone had left folded in the corner. Hayden stood some yards off, brushing down his gelding. He didn't see her at first. She watched him a moment, arms tucked against the chill. There was something steady in the way he moved, efficient but unhurried. He didn't fidget, didn't pace. This far west, men like that were rare. She crossed the clearing, boots silent in the damp grass. "You slept out here." Hayden turned, one hand still on the horse's flank. "Didn't want to crowd you, cabin small." "There's room for one more, I'd have said so." "I know," he said. "Didn't want to presume." Laurel rubbed her arms. "You always give folks that much space. When they've walked through fire, yeah." She didn't answer right away. The morning felt fragile, like stepping onto ice before it's thick enough to hold. "I was thinking of asking at the post store. They might need someone to clean or sort stock." He nodded. Cedar boxes out front looked half rotted. "Could be they need repairs too." "You looking for work?" "Not yet. But I can hammer a nail straight. I'll ask around." She studied him. "You ever think of stopping for good somewhere?" His gaze drifted toward the lodgepole pines to the west. "Used to. Before." She didn't press. Inside the cabin, Ronan stirred. Laurel turned toward the sound. "Ruthie'll be hungry soon." "I'll get biscuits from the mess shed," Hayden said. And coffee, if they've any left." She hesitated. "Thank you." He gave a single nod, then led his horse toward the stable yard. She watched him until he disappeared behind the row of buildings whose logs had faded silver with time and wind. By mid-morning, Fort Bridger stirred to life. Wagons creaked through the open gate, and the smith's hammer rang out in steady beats. Laurel washed the children's faces with rainwater pooled in a barrel, then braided Ruthie's hair while Ronan sat with his leg propped on a rolled blanket. She cleaned his scraped cheek with a strip of cloth dipped in vinegar, and he winced but didn't pull away. "Mama," he said, voice quiet, "is Mr. Zeller staying?" "I don't know yet. He's different, not like Pa, but not bad." Laurel paused. "He's kind. Is he gonna be our family now?" She swallowed. "That's a big word, honey. Let's see what tomorrow brings." At the post store, she swept ash from the hearth and restacked shelves of tinned beans and molasses. The owner, a woman named Miss Keene with hair graying at the temples, offered her 50 cents for 2 hours' work and a strip of salt pork to take home. Laurel thanked her and tucked the coins into her boot. Hayden came by that afternoon with a wrapped parcel in hand biscuits and dried peaches. He handed it to Ruthie, who hugged it to her chest like treasure. "You didn't have to, I know," he said, not waiting for her to finish. "Let me take Ronan for a walk, get him in the sun." She blinked. "He can't walk far. I'll carry him." Ronan's eyes lit up and Laurel gave a slow nod. "Mind the back path. Avoid the smith's yard." Hayden lifted the boy with ease like he'd done it 100 times. Laurel watched them go. Ronan's arms looped around Hayden's shoulders. She turned back to the stove, but her hands trembled as she cut the pork. She didn't know why it shook her so much to be given small help without price. They returned not long after, Ronan's cheeks pink from wind, his laughter echoing down the path. "He showed me a badger den," Ronan called. "And a squirrel with no tail." Hayden set him down gently. "He's got a good eye. Notice things I missed." Laurel bit the inside of her cheek. "You're good with him. He listens. That's rare." That evening, while the children played with twigs and stones outside the door, Hayden sat on the stoop, whittling a small piece of pine into a bird's shape. Laurel brought out 2 mugs of weak chicory brew. "I can't pay you for everything you've done," she said, offering the cup, not looking for pay. "Then why?" His knife paused. "Some men let others fall. I couldn't." "That's all." She sat beside him, careful to keep some space, though their arms nearly brushed. "You always ride alone." "Not always. Rode with a freight line once. Before that, cattle drive out of Abilene." "Why'd you leave it?" He sipped the drink. "Too much dust. Too many men itching to shoot over card hands." She smiled, faint and tired. "You don't seem the type." "I'm not, but I've done it." He looked out toward the pines. "I wanted silence more than I wanted coin." Ruthie's laugh rang out, and for a moment all the weight in Laurel's chest lightened. "I've forgotten how that sounds," she said. "It's a good sound." She studied him in the dimming light. "You're not what I expected when I saw you ride up." "What you expect, a man looking to trade something?" "I did," he said, voice quieter now. "Traded loneliness for something better." Their eyes met, and the silence between them held a warmth that didn't need naming. That night, after the children curled up near the stove, Hayden slept inside, his bedroll laid just behind the door. Laurel didn't question it. There was no unease in it, only a quiet comfort, and when the wind rose outside, whispering through the tall grass and pine, she didn't feel afraid. Not anymore. The snow came earlier than anyone expected, falling in slow, deliberate flakes that clung to the roofs and the shoulders of coats. It was late September, and the last of the freight wagons had pushed through Fort Bridger's pass before the storm closed the high trails. Laurel stood by the cabin window with her arms folded across her chest, watching the gray settle over the mountains. Hayden came in with a gust of cold and the smell of pine bark on his coat. He carried a sack of cracked wheat and a folded oilcloth bundle under one arm. His boots left dark prints across the threshold. "They've shut the route west," he said, hanging his hat on the peg beside the door. "No one's going through till spring." Laurel turned from the window. "You think it'll hold that long? Tracks'll vanish by tomorrow. Even if someone tried, they'd get caught halfway up the bluff." He handed her the oilcloth. "Tobacco and beeswax. Miss Keene said you could use 'em for salve." She smoothed the folds open on the table. "Ruthie's lips are already cracking. We'll keep her warm." He crouched beside the stove, feeding in a few slivers of split wood. "Store's got one more barrel of coal. I'll haul it down before night." Ruthie and Ronan sat on the floor with a wool blanket draped over their shoulders, tracing shapes into the frost on the window pane. Laurel knelt beside them, tucking the corners tighter around their legs. "You think we'll be all right here?" Ronan asked, eyes darting between the two adults. "We will," Hayden answered before Laurel could speak. "We'll keep the fire going and the food dry. That's more than most folks have out here." After the children fell asleep, Hayden stayed by the hearth, sharpening a small knife on a whetstone. Laurel sat nearby with a darning needle and Ronan's sock stretched over her hand. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It had become something else now, something steadier. "You ever wintered this far up?" she asked, eyes on her stitching. "Once. Up near Rock Springs, a miner's camp. Too many men, not enough bread." "Why stay?" he shrugged. "Had nowhere else to be." Laurel looked up. "You do now." Hayden's hand paused on the blade. He didn't look at her, but his voice was low when he said, "I know." She tied off the thread and set the sock aside. "You don't owe me anything, Hayden. I wouldn't ask you to stay if it wasn't what you wanted." He turned the knife in his palm, the edge gleaming faintly in the firelight. "I've moved for so long I forgot what stillness felt like, but this has weight to it. Feels like something I could belong to." Laurel folded her hands in her lap. "I don't know what we're building here. I just know it's better than what came before." He nodded, quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I spent too long thinking I didn't deserve to be part of something steady. But you," he stopped, choosing his words carefully, "you remind me it's possible again." Her breath caught in her throat. She reached out and touched his wrist, her fingers light but sure. "You're not the only one learning." A gust of wind rattled the shutters, but neither of them moved. The fire hissed in the stove, and the coals glowed red through the iron grate. Hayden turned his hand, letting their fingers intertwine. The next morning, the world outside was white. Snow lay thick across the path to the stable. Hayden hoisted Ronan onto his back and carried him through the drifts while Ruthie clung to Laurel's skirt. The animals had to be watered, and the troughs had frozen solid. Laurel broke the ice with a hatchet while Hayden hauled buckets from the well. Inside the barn, the mule stamped and snorted, the steam rising off its back in slow curls. Hayden rubbed it down with a burlap sack and handed Laurel a bundle of rye straw for the goats. "These chores don't end," he said, brushing snow from his collar. "They're easier with two hands," she answered, handing him a length of rope to tie the feed bags. Later, in the quiet of the cabin, Laurel sewed patches onto Ruthie's dress while Hayden sat with Ronan, carving a small toy from birchwood. His hands moved with practiced ease, and the boy watched him with rapt attention. "Will it have legs?" Ronan asked. "4 of them like a proper horse." "What's its name?" Hayden looked up. "You tell me." The boy thought for a moment. "Maybe Dusty." Hayden nodded. "Dusty it is." Laurel didn't speak, but her throat ached with the weight of it. Watching them, she saw something she hadn't dared to hope for her children safe, her home warm, and a man beside her who didn't disappear when the hard days came. That evening she stepped outside alone, breath fogging in the air. The wind had calmed and the sky glowed with the pale blue of oncoming dusk. Behind her, Hayden came to stand at her side, his coat brushing hers. "You think the spring'll come early?" she asked. He looked out over the mountains. "Could be, but I'd wait as long as it takes." She turned toward him. "So would I." When he kissed her, it wasn't rushed or uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that came after long silences and shared burdens, after every wall had fallen quietly away. His hands were calloused, but they held her like something precious. Inside, the children's voices rose in laughter, muffled through the cabin walls. Hayden leaned his forehead against hers. This feels real." She smiled, eyes bright with something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Because it is." By late October, the snow had hardened to ice along the roofline, and the wind took on a sharper bite. The cabin held warmth better since Hayden sealed the draft under the door with a length of wool he'd bartered from the blacksmith's wife. Laurel watched him now from the table, his back to her as he poured water into the wash basin. His shirt clung damp along the shoulders he'd been hauling wood since before dawn. Ruthie sat on a stool beside the hearth, her hands buried in a basket of dried beans, sorting out the split ones. Ronan leaned against the leg of Laurel's chair, sketching patterns into the soot-dusted floor with a broken stick. Their quiet filled the room like breath. "You always work like something's chasing you," Laurel said, keeping her voice low. Hayden turned, wiping his hands on a rag. "Storm's coming." "Air smells wrong." She folded her arms. "You trust the wind more than the map." "I trust what I've seen. Sky turns that color, best be ready." She didn't argue. Outside, clouds hung in a long gray line over the mountains, and the smell of mineral-rich snow clung to the air. Laurel stepped to the window, rubbing the pane clean with her sleeve. The shutters creaked faintly, nothing loud, just enough to remind her how thin the walls really were. "You ever think about going back to where you were born?" she asked, not turning around. Hayden leaned against the post near the stove. "That place forgot me long before I left it." "What was it like?" "Flat. Too much wind. Folks got mean over fence lines and water rights." He paused. "My ma died when I was young. My brother and I, well, we did what we could to keep the barn standing. But a boy can't hold up a house forever." She turned then. "Is that why you left?" "I left because I didn't want to become the kind of man who only knew how to lose things." Laurel didn't speak right away. "You're not that man." "Not anymore." He looked at her, and something in his expression shifted, not soft, not sharp, but open. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if the trail hadn't turned?" "I'd still be following Jacob's decisions 1 mile at a time," she said. "I was never asked what I wanted." "Not once." Hayden didn't fill the silence that followed. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, stopping just beside her. His voice dropped like a quiet promise. "What do you want now?" Laurel looked up at him, the answer forming slowly. "To stop apologizing for surviving. To be more than someone who endured." Outside, the wind picked up, scattering pine needles across the path. She didn't flinch when Hayden reached for her hand. His fingers were rough, but his hold was firm, not possessive. Present. "You've become more than that already," he said. She let herself lean into the moment just a little. "I don't remember who taught me to be afraid of wanting things, but I'd like to forget it." "You can," he said. "With time, and I've got time." That night, Laurel set the last log into the stove and stirred the coals until they caught. She tucked the children in with the quilt Miss Keene had given them, smoothing it over their shoulders. When she turned, Hayden was already folding out the extra blanket onto the floor beside the hearth. "You can take the bed," she said, voice even. "It gets colder on the floor." He didn't move. "And you?" "I'll be warm either way." He hesitated, watching her, then nodded once. "Only if you're sure." "I am." She turned down the lamp and the room slipped into shadow. She lay beside him on the narrow mattress, their backs to each other at first. The fire cracked once, sending a soft flare of light across the ceiling. "You're not what I expected either," she said into the dark. Hayden didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. "I've been waiting to be useful to someone for a long time." Laurel rolled slowly onto her back, then turned to face him. In the dim light, she could just make out the curve of his jaw, the faint line between his brows. "You are," she said. "You have been since the first time you stopped." His hand found hers beneath the quilt, and she didn't pull away. The fire burned low, and outside the wind began to rise. Neither of them slept for a long time. But for once, the wakefulness didn't come from fear or grief. It came from something new, something earned, something steady. And when sleep finally came, it came gently. The days settled into a rhythm that didn't ask for permission. With the pass closed and the first snow packed hard against the north side of the cabin, there was nothing left to chase but the hours of light. Hayden rose early to tend to the animals and split wood before the sun cleared the ridge. Laurel worked the mornings beside him now, her fingers red from cold, skin cracked along the knuckles but steady in the task. One afternoon, while Ruthie napped curled against a rolled coat near the stove and Ronan sat at the table shaping a scrap of leather for a sling Hayden had promised to show him how to use, Laurel sat by the window peeling apples for drying. The knife moved slow and sure in her hand, the peels falling in long, curling ribbons onto a cloth. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked without looking up. Hayden glanced over from where he knelt by the hearth. "Miss what?" "Riding wherever you pleased." Not needing to answer to anyone. He sat back on his heels. Wasn't freedom, not really, just motion. She rolled the last apple across her palm. "Sometimes I think I wouldn't mind a little motion again. We'll get you some. Come spring, we'll take the children down to the river. Let him see something moving besides snow." Laurel smiled without turning her head. "That river's still a long way off." He stood, brushing ash from his hands. "Doesn't feel far, not anymore." She looked at him then, the knife paused mid-peel. "You're different when you talk about the future." "I didn't used to have reason to." That night, Hayden unfolded a small cedar box he'd traded for 2 weeks back and set it on the table before dinner. Laurel raised her brows, wiping flour from her hands. "What's this?" He opened the lid and lifted out a ring carved from antler, polished down to soft ivory. "A single band, nothing more." "I haven't got gold," he said, "but I want to give you something honest, if you'll have it." Laurel reached out slowly. Her hand trembled as she touched the smooth surface of the ring. "I don't need gold," she said. "I never did." The cabin was quiet, the fire catching just enough to cast light across their joined hands. Ruthie stirred in the corner and mumbled something in her sleep. Ronan didn't look up from his leatherwork, but his mouth twitched like he knew something had shifted. Laurel met Hayden's eyes. "You sure you want to tie yourself to a woman with 2 children and no family name worth speaking?" "My name's enough for all of you," he said simply. "If you want it." She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as though it had waited for her. They were married 2 days later in the trading post's back room, with Miss Keene standing witness and the clerk reading from his mother's Bible. Ruthie wore a ribbon Hayden had bought with the last of his coins. Ronan stood tall at his side, chin up like a boy trying to look like a man. Afterward, Laurel and Hayden walked the children back through the snow, the sun low and gold behind them. She took his hand without needing to ask, and he didn't let go through the long winter. They lived quiet and close, patching what needed mending, taking turns reading from the 2 books left behind in the cabin by whoever lived there before. Laurel found herself laughing again, not often, but without guilt. Hayden built her a shelf for the jars she filled with dried berries. She taught him how to stitch a torn cuff, and he let her, even when it would have been quicker to do it himself. On the first warm day, when the snow cracked open over the riverbanks and the pine needles shone green again, they sat on the porch with their boots off, feet in the dirt. Ruthie chased a wooden hoop down the path, and Ronan tried to teach the goat to follow a trail of oats in his palm. Neither task met with much success, but no one minded. Laurel leaned her head against Hayden's shoulder. "You think this is what peace feels like?" He hooked his arm around her waist and pulled her closer. "I think this is the start of it." She closed her eyes against the sun. "I want to grow old here. I want the children to remember this place as a beginning, not an end." "They will," he said. "We all will." Years passed. The cabin grew with them. Hayden built a second room, then a third, and planted cottonwood saplings along the edge of the plot. Laurel kept bees in the backfield and taught Ruthie the difference between wild clover and poison hemlock. Ronan grew lanky and quiet, with his father's eyes and Hayden's patience. They buried sorrow when it came, but it never stayed long. Not in a house full of light, not with laughter echoing off the walls and spring water running clear past the door. And at night, when the wind returned to whisper through the trees, Laurel would reach for Hayden beneath the quilt, her hand finding his with the ease of habit and trust. He would turn toward her, eyes soft in the dark, and say nothing. He didn't need to. They had already said everything that mattered.